and welcome back. Today we'll be traveling down to the Bay Area for ORBX's new San Carlos Airport, down in Silicon Valley. In my video about Cleella, I stated that open, flat, grassy areas were very suitable for photo imagery. Here in the southern end of San Francisco Bay, there is another kind of scenery which also works best with photo imagery. The tidal flats, marshes, sloughs, and shallow water all look great using imagery, and this part of the San Francisco Bay is absolutely stunning in standard FTX Northern California form. In fact, it shows that mountains and fjords are not the only places that can be visually striking. When one looks at various developers, each one has a certain style. Some develop pure photo scenery. Some take photo scenery and throw some 3D objects or autogen on top. Many people call ORBX scenery land class based scenery, but that is not really true, at least for the FTX regions. They strategically incorporate photo scenery to enhance the overall picture. This takes advantage of the fact that some types of terrain look better in photoreal, some types of terrain look better in land class, and some can look good in one or the other, but only in certain situations. For example, urban terrain requires very high quality photo imagery, or else it actually detracts from the overall scenery, even if 3D buildings are placed on top. Forested areas look better in land class type scenery, but only if there are enough autogen trees populating it. This is what makes hybrid scenery types so compelling. One can take advantage of the strengths and weaknesses of different scenery types. As we fly over the southern bay, we can see things that land class based scenery would have difficulty matching. If you look down below, just beyond the West Point Harbor Marina, you'll see the original home of Pixar, maker of computer animated films. They have since moved, but that is where they started, right in the center of the coverage area. There can be a cost to this hybrid style and computing power required, but in most places enough smoothness can be maintained to make the strain on the system worth it. In remote locations, I can generally fly at or near my lock setting of 40 frames per second, and still have most eye candy features enabled. Now KSQL is in a challenging location. It is definitely not remote, being in the heart of Silicon Valley, and within striking distance of San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco. Flying around the bay, I can normally obtain reasonable performance, but adding payware airports to the mix does add to the load. In my case, I do not have Flightbeam's KSFO installed in P3D, since I use P3D for general aviation flying. As it was, I started out in the A2A C182 and had the KSQL control panel all checked and using my Pacific Northwest settings profile, which I would normally use for places like Orcas or Darrington. The C182 is one of the harder GA aircraft in my hangar, and with those settings, I actually got down into the single digits when looking north by northwest. Looking south gave significantly better frames, but I decided to go with a lighter weight aircraft, in this case the A2A Cherokee, and start playing with settings. I used no prepared.config tweaks, so all adjustments were made with the P3D in-sim settings and the airport's own control panel. I found that for my 4.8 GHz system, I had to remove cloud and terrain shadows, drop building autogen to normal. Tree autogen I kept it very dense, however. I also unchecked some of the shadow receive settings, like buildings and sim objects, that normally I leave checked. The airport's own control panel is a little different than most, in that it has three options that are for the region in which the airport sits, rather than just the airport scenery. So one can disable the port cranes, marina objects, and marine lighting. Incorporating this is probably a sign that the developers understood that the location induced performance issues. For this video, all 3 of those items were unchecked. The only item left checked for the airport was the vegetation, because it didn't appear to have an impact on smoothness or frames. The extra vehicles option didn't affect my frames, but it did seem to increase stuttering. And as far as marina objects go, I've learned that they are usually heavy scenery elements in ORBX world. I also entertained disabling HDR, but I ran into the red square phenomenon with Rex 4. Rex 4 still has an issue with sun effects in P3D 2.5, I believe due to the new folder locations. The speed with which everyone else released patches for 2.5 does contrast with Rex, who seem to be waiting for the next service packs to issue the fix. However, it is really a single issue rather than a general incompatibility. All of this said, I was able to achieve satisfactory performance. Now, I use Shadowplay to make these videos, and one issue with it is that if frame rates are under 30, it will tend to exaggerate micro stutters. So the real-time live flight experience was actually somewhat smoother than the video output that you see here. I ended up averaging almost 22 frames per second from the VC and higher outside for the flight. VAS usage here in the A2A Cherokee was around 3 to 3.1 gigabytes, which is just slightly higher than what I get at Orcus. The problem was once again looking north-northwest. Interestingly, the same recorded flight with the airport deactivated was actually only less than 2 frames per second higher, although it was considerably smoother, especially in pans. However, this shows that any performance challenges here are based primarily on the location. I would be wary here if Flightbeam's SFO or ImagineSim's SJC were active at the same time while flying here. That might just be too much. Then again, if one is flying buses, one wouldn't be flying at San Carlos anyways, so there really is no reason to have them all active in the scenery library at once. This video is proof, however, that acceptable performance can be had here. Performance aside, the airport is indeed quite nice. Interestingly, the airport is at the very southwestern edge of the scenery coverage area. The blue buildings of Oracle are clearly visible up in the northwestern part of the scenery coverage area, and though Pixar's original home is smack in the center of the area, don't fret, they are still in the Northern California region, having moved to Emeryville, not far from the eastern terminus of the Oakland Bay Bridge. Most of the surface area of the scenery is covered with various sloughs as well as Bear Island. Frankly, these sloughs and flats not only are important wildlife refuges, but they never cease to amaze me visually from the air. I made a video a few months ago of a trip from Haywood Municipal to Monterey, and probably took up too much screen time just looking at the Southern Bay. Well, before we land, I hope you enjoyed our visit to the Southern Bay area and Silicon Valley. If you liked what you saw, please hit like and by all means subscribe. Hasta!